The autumn rains had settled hard over the Willamette Valley by the third week of October, 1893, turning the streets of Cedar Hollow into rutted channels of mud that swallowed a man's boots to the ankle and dampened the mood of the entire town beneath low, gray skies that showed no sign of clearing before winter properly arrived. Nathaniel Prescott stood inside Myers Pawn and Loan that gray afternoon, his daughter Clementine waiting outside beneath the shop's narrow overhang, 5 years old and shivering despite the coat he'd wrapped twice around her small shoulders. He held his wedding ring in his palm, turning it once beneath the shop's dim lamplight before setting it on the counter, the last thing of value either of them owned besides each other. He did not know, walking back out into the rain with $3 pressed into his coat pocket and his ring finger bare for the first time in 6 years, that a woman across the street had watched the entire exchange through the pawn shop's rain-streaked window, or that before the sunset that evening she would do something so entirely unexpected that the whole town of Cedar Hollow would still be discussing it come the following Sunday's sermon. Cordelia Ashford sat in her carriage outside the Mercantile, waiting for her driver to finish loading supplies, when the sight of a father's bare hand emerging from that particular door caught her attention and refused to release it. Nathaniel Prescott had once owned a modest but thriving carpentry shop in Cedar Hollow, steady work building furniture and doing repairs that had supported his wife Emily and their small daughter comfortably enough until a workshop fire 8 months earlier destroyed his tools, his lumber stock, and nearly the building itself in a single terrible night that no one had ever properly explained. Emily had died 3 months after that, a wasting grief and exhaustion the town doctor called simply a broken heart, though Nathaniel privately believed the fire had taken something from her that the fever which followed merely finished claiming. He had spent the month since selling what remained of their possessions piece by piece to keep himself and Clementine fed, the wedding ring being nearly the last item of any real value left to sell. Cordelia Ashford had inherited the largest timber operation in the valley from her late husband Richard, a man who had built the business from a single small sawmill into the most prosperous lumber operation for 50 miles before a logging accident took him 3 years earlier, a falling tree crushing him instantly on a job site he had visited that particular day only because his usual foreman had taken ill. She was 40 years old, and she had spent those 3 years running the operation with a careful, determined competence that had earned her respect from every timberman in the valley, though the grand house she occupied alone had grown considerably quieter with each passing season, 8 years of marriage having never produced the children she and Richard had both quietly hoped for, before his death ended the possibility entirely. She had learned, in those 3 years, to trust her own judgment above the constant unsolicited advice offered by men who assumed a widow's operation required considerably more oversight than her late husband's had ever actually needed. Cordelia had recognized something in the particular way Nathaniel walked back to his waiting daughter, shoulders bent not merely against the rain but against something heavier that no coat could properly shield him from, and she found herself unable to simply continue with her own afternoon's errands, as though she hadn't witnessed a private tragedy playing out across the street. She instructed her driver to follow the pair at a discreet distance, and what she observed over the following hour, Nathaniel, using his small proceeds to purchase bread and a bit of cheese before shepherding Clementine toward what appeared to be a single rented room above the livery stable, settled something in her mind with unexpected finality. By the time full dark had properly claimed Cedar Hollow, Cordelia had made arrangements that would set the entire town speaking before the week was finished. What Cordelia did by nightfall shocked the whole town once word finally spread, though in the moment itself, it began with nothing more dramatic than her carriage stopping outside the livery stable and her own 2 feet carrying her up the narrow stairs to knock directly on Nathaniel's door. He answered with visible surprise, Clementine peering curiously from behind his legs, both of them clearly startled by an unexpected visitor of Cordelia's obvious standing appearing at such a humble doorway. "Mrs. Ashford," Nathaniel said, recognition dawning slowly. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced, ma'am. What business could bring you to a place like this?" Cordelia held up a small velvet pouch, and when Nathaniel opened it with visibly shaking hands, He found his own wedding ring resting inside, purchased back from Meyer's pawn within the hour of his selling it. "I saw you sell this today," Cordelia said plainly, "and I found I couldn't simply watch a man lose something that important without at least offering him the chance to keep it, if keeping it matters to you as much as I suspect it does." Nathaniel stared at the ring, then at Cordelia, utterly unable to form words for several long moments. "I can't accept this," he finally managed. "You don't know me, ma'am. I sold that ring because I needed the money, not because I'd changed my mind about parting with it. Buying it back doesn't solve anything beyond returning me to exactly where I started, minus whatever you spent recovering it." Cordelia's composed expression didn't waver. "Then let me offer something that solves rather more than a single ring's return," she said. "I own a timber operation that has run short-handed in its finishing shop for the better part of a year. I need someone who understands fine woodwork, someone who can build furniture and cabinetry to the standard my finer clients expect, rather than simply cutting raw lumber. I'm told you ran a respected carpentry shop before the fire took it. I have work, real work, and wages fair enough that you'd never need to sell anything so precious to feed your daughter again." "I don't take charity, ma'am," Nathaniel said, the same exhausted pride that had carried him through 8 brutal months rising sharp in his chest, despite his obvious exhaustion. "Whatever kindness prompted this, I can't simply accept a position I haven't properly earned." Cordelia studied him for a long moment, something firm and unwavering settling into her expression. "I'm not offering you charity, Mr. Prescott," she said. "I watched you sell your wedding ring rather than let your daughter go hungry, and I watched you spend every cent of those proceeds on food for her before securing your own room for the night. That tells me considerably more about your character than any letter of reference could manage. I have a genuine need for skilled woodwork, and you have genuine skill sitting idle while your family suffers. I find myself with very little patience left for watching good men destroy themselves through pride when honest work could ease their circumstances considerably." She glanced toward Clementine, who had crept fully into view now, watching the exchange with wide, hopeful eyes. "Your daughter deserves better than a rented room above a livery stable, Mr. Prescott. Come see the operation tomorrow. Decide for yourself whether the work suits you before you refuse an offer you haven't properly examined." Nathaniel looked down at the ring still resting in his palm, then toward Clementine, then finally back at Cordelia, standing in the narrow hallway with a patience that suggested she wouldn't simply leave without some manner of answer. "I'll come look at it," he said finally. "Not because I trust the offer entirely yet, ma'am, but because I'd be a poor father to refuse the chance to properly examine work that might genuinely help my daughter." Cordelia nodded, something that might have been the beginning of respect crossing her expression. "A sensible condition," she said. "Come tomorrow morning. Bring Clementine if you'd like. I'd rather she see the operation herself than simply trust a stranger's word for its suitability." The timber operation, when Nathaniel inspected it properly the following day, employed nearly 40 men across the sawmill and finishing shop, and his walkthrough of the finishing operation revealed exactly the gap Cordelia had described: rough furniture and basic cabinetry that fell considerably short of what her finer clients in Portland and Salem were willing to pay premium prices for. He presented his assessment plainly, describing specific techniques and joinery methods that could elevate the shop's output considerably, and Cordelia listened with visible relief that someone had finally articulated the problem clearly enough to address it properly. "You'll take the position," she said, not quite a question. "I'll take it," Nathaniel agreed, "provided the wages are fair and the work is genuinely mine to shape as I see fit, not simply mine until someone with more seniority disagrees with my methods." Cordelia extended her hand to seal the arrangement. "Genuinely yours," she said. "I've watched this shop underperform for a year because no one had the skill to properly correct it. I don't intend to undermine the very expertise I've just hired to fix that problem." The small cottage near the finishing shop, when Nathaniel and Clementine moved into it the following week, sat considerably closer to comfortable than anything either of them had known since the fire: a proper hearth, sound walls, a kitchen stocked with more provisions than Nathaniel had managed to keep on hand in 8 months of careful, desperate rationing. Clementine claimed the smaller room with quiet delight, running her small hand along the real glass window pane as though she could scarcely believe such a thing belonged to her now. And that first night, Nathaniel sat beside his sleeping daughter a long while, still faintly disbelieving of how completely their circumstances had shifted in the span of a single unexpected day. By the second morning, Clementine had already discovered the small garden plot behind the cottage, declaring with great seriousness that she intended to grow proper flowers there once spring finally arrived. A small, ordinary hope that struck Nathaniel harder than almost anything else in that entire strange, sudden week of change. He threw himself into the finishing shop work with the same careful discipline that had once made his own carpentry business respected throughout the valley. And within a month, the shop's output had transformed noticeably, orders from Portland clients increasing as word of the improved craftsmanship spread through timber trade circles. Cordelia found herself visiting the cottage most evenings, first under the excuse of reviewing the shop's improving order books herself, though the truth ran considerably deeper with every visit that passed. She brought Clementine's small picture books and sat with her by the hearth while Nathaniel finished his evening work, discovering in herself a warmth toward the girl that startled her after 8 childless years of marriage and 3 more of solitary grief. One evening, she found a small carved wooden jewelry box resting on the cottage porch rail. No note attached, the wood still faintly warm from the whittling knife, and finished with the same careful joinery he'd brought to the shop's finer commissions. And she knew exactly whose hands had made it, keeping it beside her bed for several days before finding the words to properly thank him. Not every week passed smoothly. In mid-November, while helping load a particularly heavy shipment of finished furniture bound for Portland, Nathaniel's leg was caught and badly crushed beneath a piece that shifted unexpectedly during loading, the injury severe enough that the town doctor feared for weeks whether he'd walk properly again at all. The accident happened swiftly, a single misjudged angle as the wagon bed shifted on uneven ground, and Nathaniel's cry of pain brought half the shop floor running before Otis Bramwell and another hand managed to free him from beneath the weight. Cordelia rode for the doctor herself rather than send a hand, covering the distance to town in considerably less time than the errand should have taken, and sat through the following anxious days helping care for both Nathaniel and Clementine, the girl frightened and confused by her father's sudden incapacitation. "You didn't have to involve yourself this directly," Nathaniel said weakly from his sickbed, watching Cordelia change a dressing with careful, practiced hands. "I've buried a husband to an accident I couldn't prevent," Cordelia said simply. "I wasn't about to sit idle while another man I've come to care about fought through one I might actually help with." Nathaniel studied her a long moment, something in her careful phrasing settling into his understanding with unexpected weight. Word of the arrangement spread through Cedar Hollow exactly as Nathaniel had feared it might, though the injury and Cordelia's obvious concern for his recovery softened much of the gossip that might otherwise have circulated freely. Women at the Mercantile whispered that the widow Ashford had taken a peculiar interest in some fire-ruined carpenter she'd found selling his own wedding ring. That loneliness had clearly overtaken her usually sound judgment, though several conceded that watching her nurse him through a serious injury suggested considerably more genuine feeling than simple charity might explain. Cordelia herself, hearing fragments of the talk secondhand through her own household staff, found she cared rather less about the town's opinion than she once might have, a private realization that surprised her nearly as much as anything Nathaniel's arrival had brought into her life. One of Cordelia's longest-serving foremen, a weathered man named Otis Bramwell, who had worked the operation since Richard's own time, finally spoke plainly in Nathaniel's defense one evening at the Mercantile counter. "I've watched that man's finishing work triple our Portland orders in 2 months," Otis said. "I've watched Cordelia sit up 3 nights running nursing him through a leg injury that would have crippled most men permanently. Whatever this town wants to whisper about charity, I've never once seen either of them take advantage of the other." Cordelia heard the rest of the whispers herself and let them slide past her like rain off an oiled coat, though the true danger arrived not as gossip, but as a financial crisis that threatened everything Nathaniel's recovery had begun to rebuild. The injury kept Nathaniel from proper work for nearly 2 months, and during his recovery, a Portland lumber broker who had been quietly courting Cordelia's largest clients for over a year finally succeeded in poaching 3 major contracts, exploiting the finishing shop's temporary loss of its most skilled craftsmen to argue that Cordelia's operation could no longer reliably deliver the quality her reputation had promised. The broker, a calculating man named Percival Doyle, timed his approach precisely around Nathaniel's incapacitation, and by the time Nathaniel had recovered enough to properly assess the damage, the operation had lost contracts representing nearly a third of its annual finishing revenue, a blow severe enough to threaten jobs across the entire shop floor. "This is my fault," Nathaniel said that evening, reading through the lost contracts with visible anguish despite his still healing leg. "If I hadn't been laid up these 2 months, Doyle never would have found the opening he needed." Cordelia sat down across from him, her own exhaustion plain after weeks of managing both his recovery and the operation's mounting troubles. "An accident during loading isn't a failure of character, Nathaniel," she said firmly. "I won't have you carrying guilt for an injury neither of us could have prevented, any more than I've allowed myself to properly grieve Richard's accident, as though I somehow failed to prevent that too." She was quiet a moment, watching the fire. "Tell me about Emily," she said softly, "if you're willing to." Nathaniel stared into the flames a long while before answering. "She had a gentleness that made even the fire's aftermath feel survivable for a while," he said. "I keep thinking if I'd checked the workshop stove more carefully that final night, tested it properly before banking it down, none of what followed might have happened at all, and she might still be here helping Clementine grow instead of me trying to explain someday why she isn't." Cordelia's eyes filled with a grief of her own, carefully guarded across 8 years of marriage and 3 more of solitary mourning. "Richard died on a job site he only visited because his usual foreman had taken ill that particular morning," she said quietly. "I've spent 3 years believing that if I'd simply insisted he stay home that day, sent someone else entirely, he might still be alive. I understand considerably better than most people the particular cruelty of wondering what might have been different if only some small thing had gone otherwise." She was quiet a moment, watching the fire. "What was Emily like?" she asked softly. "Before all of it?" Nathaniel managed a small, unsteady smile. "Stubborn about the smallest things," he said. "She'd argue with me for an hour over whether a shelf hung true, then let the largest decisions of our life together settle in a single conversation without a single word of disagreement. I think I loved that about her more than almost anything else, how she saved her stubbornness for what actually mattered." Cordelia considered this. "Richard was steady in nearly the opposite way," she said. "Never argued about small things at all, simply worked around them without complaint. I used to think that made him easier to love. Now I wonder if it simply made me less prepared for how much I'd have to face entirely on my own once he was gone." Nathaniel reached across and took her hand properly. "Then perhaps," he said, "we ought to face whatever Doyle intends to keep taking from this operation together, rather than either of us facing loss alone the way we've both grown so accustomed to doing. We are more than halfway through Cordelia and Nathaniel's story now, and if a wedding ring recovered from a pawnshop counter has stirred something in you, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss the next tale from this same forgotten stretch of the Oregon frontier. What do you think will happen when Nathaniel returns fully to the finishing shop and Percival Doyle realizes his advantage has vanished? Tell us in the comments whether you believe Cordelia's operation can win back what Doyle managed to poach during Nathaniel's recovery." Now, back to Cedar Hollow, where a Portland showcase was about to determine the operation's future. Nathaniel returned to the finishing shop, still favoring his injured leg, but with his craftsmanship entirely undiminished, and he and Cordelia together devised a plan to win back the operation's reputation decisively, rather than simply competing for scattered individual contracts. A prominent Portland furniture exhibition was scheduled for early spring, drawing buyers and clients from across the entire territory, and Cordelia proposed that Nathaniel design and build a showcase piece, a full dining set, demonstrating precisely the craftsmanship that had made his own Cedar Hollow shop respected before the fire took it. Nathaniel threw himself into the project through the following weeks, working through lingering pain in his leg to produce work he considered the finest of his entire career, selecting each board personally for grain and character, spending entire evenings simply studying a single joint before committing to its final form. Cordelia sat with him many evenings, simply keeping him company through the long hours of careful, exacting labor. And it was in the sawdust and quiet concentration of those evenings, more than in any single dramatic gesture, that both of them came to understand exactly how thoroughly their arrangement had grown into something neither had originally intended. The Portland exhibition, when it finally arrived in early March, drew exactly the audience Cordelia had hoped for. Buyers and clients from across the territory examining furniture and finished goods from operations throughout the region. The exhibition hall itself, filled with the mingled scent of fresh varnish and cut cedar. Nathaniel's dining set, displayed prominently at the Ashford operations booth, drew considerable attention throughout the exhibition's opening day, buyers examining the joinery and finish work with a particular appreciation of people who understood genuine craftsmanship when they encountered it, several running careful hands along the table's edge to test the precision of its finish. Percival Doyle, attending the same exhibition representing his own poached contracts, found himself increasingly uncomfortable as word spread that the very craftsman whose absence he'd exploited had returned considerably stronger than before, several of his own recently acquired clients drifting toward the Ashford booth to examine work that plainly exceeded anything their new arrangement had produced. By the exhibition's final day, 2 of the 3 contracts Doyle had originally poached had returned to the Ashford operation entirely, clients citing Nathaniel's demonstrated craftsmanship as reason enough to reconsider their earlier decision, and a prominent Portland department store placed an order for a full showroom's worth of furniture that exceeded the value of everything Doyle had managed to claim during Nathaniel's recovery combined. The department store's buyer, a discerning man who had walked past a dozen other booths without pausing, spent nearly 20 minutes examining Nathaniel's dining set before finally extending his hand to seal the arrangement, remarking that he hadn't seen joinery of that quality since his own apprenticeship years back east. Doyle approached Cordelia directly on the exhibition's closing afternoon, his earlier confidence considerably diminished. "I timed my approach around an injury, not genuine business superiority," he admitted, something almost like respect beneath his obvious disappointment. "I'll own that was a poor foundation to build contracts upon, Mrs. Ashford, and I expect the market has rather thoroughly demonstrated as much." Otis Bramwell, standing nearby, permitted himself a satisfied smile at the acknowledgement. Outside the exhibition hall that evening, Cordelia turned to Nathaniel, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You saved this operation," she said softly. "We saved it," Nathaniel corrected gently. "Together, same as everything else since you knocked on my door with my own ring in your hand." Cordelia's breath caught, the careful composure she'd maintained through 3 years of solitary grief finally giving way entirely. "I offered you a position in my finishing shop, Nathaniel," she whispered. "I find I want considerably more than that now. I want the man who rebuilt an entire operations reputation through sheer skill and stubborn determination, and who sat with me through my own worst fears about losing everything Richard built." Nathaniel did not answer with words. He crossed the small distance between them right there outside the exhibition hall and took her hands, and in the gathering dusk of a Portland evening, with Otis Bramwell and a scattering of exhibition attendees looking on, he kissed her. It was not a kiss of fleeting relief or public spectacle. It was a kiss of promise, of survival, of 2 people who had each buried someone they loved and had somehow, against every hard frontier odd, found their way to standing together in the wreckage of losses finally overcome. The finishing shop's reputation only grew stronger through the following months, Nathaniel's leg healing fully by summer, and the operation's Portland contracts expanding well beyond what Doyle had ever managed to poach in the first place. Spring arrived slowly across the Willamette Valley the following year, wildflowers blooming first along the very road where Nathaniel had once walked with $3 in his pocket and his ring finger bare, and Cordelia and Nathaniel were married beneath the cottonwoods in a real ceremony. Wildflowers gathered by hands from across the valley who had once merely whispered about the arrangement and now came bearing gifts instead, and a fiddle player from the Cedar Hollow Saloon, donating his afternoon for free. saying afterward that he had never seen two people look at each other quite the way they did that day. Clementine stood as flower girl in a new dress of fine blue wool, and when the ceremony ended, she ran to Cordelia without prompting and called her mama for the very first time, small arms thrown around her waist with complete, uncomplicated certainty. Cordelia froze entirely still, one hand pressed to her heart, tears spilling freely down her face before she gathered Clementine into her arms, holding her the way she had once dreamed of holding a daughter of her own in a life that had finally, truly stopped feeling empty. Years later, travelers passing through Cedar Hollow still spoke of the Ashford timber operation, though most had long since started calling it something simpler: the finest woodwork in the entire valley, born from a single wedding ring recovered from a pawnshop counter one rainy October afternoon. Otis Bramwell, grown grayer with each passing winter, still told newcomers the story of that first evening, always ending it the same way: that he had never seen a stranger's small act of nightfall kindness grow into something that rebuilt an entire operation's reputation and doubted he ever would again. Clementine herself, grown into a steady young woman who had learned fine joinery at her father's side, liked to tell visitors that she remembered almost nothing of the rain-soaked walk back from the pawnshop that afternoon, only that she had woken the following morning to a warm bed and a woman she had not yet properly met, but would, within a single season, come to love without reservation. Above the mantel in the main house, beside the small carved wooden jewelry box worn smooth from years of handling, sat the very wedding ring Cordelia had recovered from Meyer's pawn, kept now as a keepsake of exactly where everything had begun rather than worn daily, replaced on Nathaniel's hand by a simpler band that marked something considerably newer. "It started with a ring sold for bread," Cordelia liked to say to anyone who asked about it, "and it ended with the truest family I ever thought I'd get to have." Family isn't always about the blood that runs in a person's veins. Sometimes it's about the people who notice a stranger's private tragedy through a rain-streaked window and choose, with everything they have, to make certain that tragedy doesn't have to be faced entirely alone. It's about the hard bargains desperate people strike simply to survive an Oregon autumn, and the quiet grace that can turn those bargains into something that lasts a lifetime, one honest kindness at a time, long after the pawnshop counter where it all began has faded into little more than a fond and grateful memory. If Nathaniel and Cordelia's story stayed with you, tell us in the comments which moment moved you most: the ring recovered from the pawnshop, the Portland exhibition, or the little girl who called her mama for the very first time. Please like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who still believes a stranger's quiet attention can change the entire course of a family's life. In our next story, a widowed schoolteacher offers a grieving rancher one impossible winter bargain, and neither of them expects what it will cost to keep it. This is a fictional frontier romance inspired by the real hardships of the American West, and while it touches on grief, poverty, and the fear of losing everything a family has built, every difficult moment has been told with care and without graphic detail, brought to life here for your entertainment. Until the next trail, keep your fire burning and your heart open to the stranger at your gate. God bless the pioneers, and God bless the hearts that refuse to break.